with Juno on a trek to Jupiter, a planetary piece of the puzzle on the beginning of our solar system. Your roll program is affirmative.
Greetings, Kerbonauts! This is Kerbal Space Program. I'm Bob Fitch, and this is the second part of the Juno mission going to Jupiter in real solar system. In the first part, we saw the Juno rocket launched up on an Atlas V, a 551 configuration, meaning it had a 5-meter fairing, 5 solid rocket boosters, and a single-engine Centaur. In part 1, we took a closer look at the Atlas launcher and went as far as low Earth orbit for the first shutdown of the Centaur second stage. Now we need to get into position for our exit burn and take a deep look at the Juno satellite itself. The Centaur can be started several times, but we're only going to start it one more time for this mission. We'll burn it out completely, which will put us into an elliptical orbit around the Sun, going out to just past Mars. It'll take an Earth gravity assist slingshot to get Juno going out as far as Jupiter. Just now, I've created a maneuver that has the same delta V requirements as the delta V remaining in the Centaur, and we're positioning it to get ready for that burn. While we wait to get into position, let's take our first look at Juno inside the VAB. My usual technique would be to show you the entire thing and then break it apart a little bit at a time, but I think in this case it'll work better if we build it up one piece at a time. So we'll start with the Juno electronics vault. The vault is about 180 kilograms of shielding protecting 20 kilograms of instruments and holds the heart of the spacecraft. The walls are 1 centimeter thick titanium to protect it against Jupiter's intense radiation. I welded some louvers into the sides to show its cooling system. The vault needs to withstand extremes of hot and cold temperatures. I took a normal probe core and scaled it up to just over 1 meter on each side, and made it square. The louvers come out of Lackluster Labs. Next, we'll want to build up the core a little bit, so we'll go over here to one of these hexagonal structures. I've put 2 connection nodes on this structure so that I can attach it one underneath here like that, and then have some space under there where we can put the core strut that will go down the middle and provide the conduits right in here where fuel can flow from the fuel tanks that we'll be attaching in a moment down to the engine right through there. Each of these hex panels is 60 kilograms, and we'll be putting another one down here on the bottom like this. This core strut is 155 kilograms. As you can see, that's made up of 4 welded octagonal struts, and then just some fuel pipes. Next up, we're going to want some of these Juno inner panels. They're carbon composite sandwich panels. The inner panels are 10 kilograms each and go in like this. But we'll symmetry these to have 6 of them so that we can put them in like this. We'll slide them back and forth just a little bit to get just the right amount of space between the edge and the front, and having it go a little bit into that strut in the middle. And just like that, we'll drop them down. As you can see, there are some wires welded into the panels just to give them a little bit of a cooler look, since in the real craft there are wires that run all through the inside here. Next, we'll attach a couple fuel tanks. We have hydrazine tanks, and we'll be placing 4 of those, so I'll symmetry those 2 at a time. We'll put a couple down like that here, then we'll do it again, just like this inside here. Just doing 2 of those, so now we have 2 there and 2 there. And then we'll grab these oxidizer tanks, and again symmetry that so there's 2 of them opposite each other right here. And now we have all 6 fuel tanks. Using a normal squad fuel pipe, we'll just run it in like that, and then do that to each of the tanks. And so now we're up to this, to represent the Juno helium bottles that were used to pressurize those tanks. We'll just throw those right down underneath here, symmetry that so there's at least 3 of them in there, and then assume that those are going to just be running their helium up through some sort of pipes or something into these tanks to keep those pressurized during flight. We'll come back to that in a bit because right now it's time to start up the Centaur for a second time. This will begin the 9-minute long burn that will send this satellite on its way out of the Earth's sphere of influence, headed for Jupiter. we're generating just under 100 kilonewtons of force from our workhorse, the RL-10 engine. It's not much, but with an ISP and vacuum of almost 450 seconds, powered by liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, we can get a lot of delta V out of this stage. And yet still not enough to get us all the way to Jupiter, and that's why we're going to be swinging around after one orbit and a deep space maneuver to align our trajectory with Earth, where we can do a gravity slingshot assist that will send us the rest of the way to Jupiter. The first stage had burned about 4.5 minutes, and then the first burn of the Centaur was about 6 minutes. After that, we coasted for 30. So after this second Centaur burn, we'll still only be less than an hour into our flight, this epic journey that's going to take years to get to its destination. Well, we've almost escaped Earth's gravity now, but it looks like we have a little bit longer, so let's look in the VAB at a bit more of the Juno construction. We have the basic structure of the satellite now. We need to put an engine down on the bottom, so we'll be using this Lyros 1B engine right here. Just 15 kilograms. The engine itself is only 4.5, but there's some shielding that goes around it, so I welded an AIES engine right there inside a docking port because I figured the shield on that looked similar to the shielding that I'm supposed to have on this engine. So together with the shielding in the engine, we have that. Now down here on the bottom. For communications up top, we're going to go with this Juno HGA, the high gain antenna. To show that all of these things take power, I've put on them some anti-generators. All of the instruments are using up a little bit of power, so you'll see here minus 4.2 per minute electrical charge. I'll show you where I got that kind of data in just a moment, but first let's grab this antenna and stick it right up on top. There we go. This will serve not just as the communications back to Earth, but also as part of a gravity science experiment.
I've been asked in to help with the gravity science experiment. Measuring Jupiter's gravity depends on measuring changes in the spacecraft velocities that goes around Jupiter. What we're looking is for variations in that acceleration rate that tells us something about the change in the gravitational field of Jupiter as it gets closer to the surface, associated with a mass structure inside. And so what we're trying to do then is measure the spacecraft's velocity as a function of time very, very accurately. And we do that by measuring the Doppler shift of the radio signal. So if you've ever heard a fire engine going by with its siren, as it's approaching you, it's high pitch, and then when it goes by, it goes, right? That Doppler shift, that change in pitch, tells you about the velocity of the fire engine relative to you. So the instrument that we use is sort of a combination of the listening on the ground to the radio signal and the radio signal transmitted by the spacecraft. So the biggest part of the instrument, of course, is a 34-meter diameter radio antenna at Goldstone, California. Then on the spacecraft, there's a high-gain antenna that's pointed at the Earth. So the radio instrument measures the voltage coming in from the antenna from the Earth, and then it transmits a voltage that goes fed out to the radio signal to send back to the Earth. And then the gravity measurement tells us something about density variations, which then can tell us something about whether there's storms on the outside or whether they penetrate all the way through, and whether there's some hint of a structure at the center other than just compressed gas of the hydrogen.
Back here at Earth, that 9-minute burn is coming to a close very soon. We can see as our elliptical orbit around the Earth is extending further and further away, until finally it pops and we have to go out, zoom out here, scroll to where we can see our orbit extending now out past Mars. This will go until that Centaur is completely devoid of any fuel. We're even using our RCS system to get a little extra push, even though it's a tiny bit. We're only going to save enough to give Juno a spin before we release it. Juno is spin stabilized, but rather than using any of the fuel from Juno itself, we're going to take advantage of the fact that we're still attached to the Centaur, spin that up to 1.4 revolutions per minute, and then we can decouple it and let it go on its way. After decoupling, that Centaur will just drift endlessly in interplanetary space going around the sun. Maybe someday some high-tech humans will go out and salvage it, put it in a museum as a relic from a couple thousand years before their time. Now we will slowly open up the solar panels, which will, due to the conservation of angular momentum, actually reduce our spin down by 2/3. But once they're open, we can start to recharge our batteries. Here at Earth, there is much more sun than there will be at Jupiter, so that should happen fairly quickly. I'm also going to deploy my WAVES instrument now, just to give it a little test before we get to Jupiter and find out that it doesn't work or something. You can see that extending down there off the bottom.
The WAVES instrument is basically a radio. It tunes to frequencies all the way from 50 hertz, which is near the bottom of the audio frequency range, up to above 40 megahertz, which is above the limit of the radio emissions that Jupiter generates. The WAVES instrument has two sensors. One is designed to measure the electric field component of these waves, and it looks like a pair of rabbit ear antennas that you might have had on a TV when you were a kid, except these are about 10 feet long. The other sensor is a much smaller device. It's about 10 inches long, and it's basically a coil of wire. It has about 10,000 turns on it, and it's designed to measure the magnetic fluctuations of waves. So these two sensors are used by the receivers to study the various phenomenon, particularly in Jupiter's polar magnetosphere. For example, the maximum frequency of the radio emissions that we detect told us what the magnetic field strength was in the magnetosphere of Jupiter, long before any spacecraft arrived. Juno was designed to actually go to another planet and make the first measurements of an extraterrestrial auroral region in great detail. So I think we learn about ourselves by studying other environments in the universe.
We've seen a few more pieces of Juno out in orbit now, so let's show what they're like down in here. We'll take these Juno outer panels first. A bit heavier than the ones we already attached on the inside because these go on the outside and are bigger. I would symmetry these all the way around the outside, 6 of those, and flip them up to cover up that interior. You could see though that they had some extra piping in there, some wires and cables and stuff, so that if we were inside looking in here, we could see all of these little pipes and cables running through the interior. I talked about the solar panels and the batteries and the WAVES instrument, so let's take a look at those right now. Here's my Juno main battery. It's a 55 amp hour battery, and using some real-world examples, I took a guess at the mass that this thing ought to be. Juno had a couple of these placed on the outside right along in here, so I just took a couple like that and I put them out there on the side as well. For the solar panels, I have some special joints that I got out of Infernal Robotics, but then I scaled them to different sizes to allow me to put them on these sides and make them look really long like piano hinges. I have 2 different sizes. I have this base size and this joint size that goes in the middle of the solar panel. Those panels were constructed by using these special backing pieces. I have this one here that says Juno Solar Backing Base. So the base obviously would go right here. We would just have to orient that correctly by spinning it around in the right direction. From there we would take one of these Juno Solar Hinge middles and put that down on the bottom. And then once that's attached down there, we go back and get one of these middle plates. So here's a Juno Solar middle, and that would go on right here. Once this is attached, notice these are slightly different sizes too. This middle one here, the base one, is a bit smaller than the middle one. You can see the sides of it sticking out right there, right over here and over here. It's just a little bit bigger. Then once again, we'd add another hinge and another backing piece, extending them out until we had all 3 solars, and I built them one at a time because you can't symmetry this, because on one of the panels, when you're all done, we take this instrument that I welded together out of a bunch of structural pieces, as well as a few AIES engines to make little cones right there. This piece is the magnetometer, and it sticks out from the last solar panel. So one of the solar panels could be made and then a copy of it could be grabbed and put over on the other side, but then that third one needs to be custom built so that this magnetometer goes on the end of it. I will show you that in just a second, but first let's go down here and take a look at where the WAVES instrument would be. So that's constructed out of a few different parts. We have this right here, the Juno WAVES base, which would go on like that. I had two WAVES rotators where I put one on this side and one on this side, and then took these Juno WAVES antennas, grabbed that and put that on the rotator, and then just spun it around until it was lined up nicely going along the bottom right here, and then set up a special Infernal Robotics group for that. For the solar panels, once those backing pieces were down, we took one of these three solars that I've scaled at different sizes, one for the base size right here, which would then go on this panel sort of like that. Or if it were one of the middle pieces, then we might use this Juno panel that's a little bit bigger than the others. See how that's just a little bit wider than that one that I've put down on that base part. Or I might use this end panel right here. But once we have all of those out there, then we can construct the panels that go all the way out. Here's a good look at the solar panels being tested by the scientists. They're helping to support them since they're in gravity right now, and obviously in space they wouldn't be. Jumping ahead to just after finishing the construction of the solar panels, which was a little bit too tedious for all the steps to show you them one by one, you can see that I have that last part of the WAVES instrument right there. It's this coil that's constructed out of a couple of normal squad accelerometers and then an antenna welded in between them, and I took one of those and I stuck it right there on the edge. You can see that I even put in descriptions. The magnetic antenna, called a magnetic search coil, consists of a coil of fine wire wrapped 10,000 times around a 15 centimeter long core. The search coil measures magnetic fluctuations in the audio frequency range. Also, once again, you can see that I have the electric charge negative 36 per hour, showing that this coil does have a bit of a drain when it's in use. And I mentioned earlier that I was going to tell you how I got some of all those calculations for how much power and everything to use. Well, I got it by looking at things like this. By digging deep enough into the internet, you can find things like this chart showing the mass values of the different instruments, and then as we scroll down, some of the power requirements of them. And all of that fed into this spreadsheet that I showed last time that had all the different parts of Juno, as well as their dry mass values, and over here their wattage that they were using. Now this of course assumes that they're all active, which they wouldn't all be active at the same time, but I can't simulate that in KSP, so I just made them all active all the time. That came out down here at the bottom to about 417 watts. And Juno's solar panels over at Jupiter should be able to provide enough to cover that. You can see that I have covered every little itty bit of this whole thing, dry mass values and quantities multiplied out to determine the dry mass values of that line, and in the cases where I had to deal with fuel, I have that in there, and then all of that gets summed up down here to 3625 kilograms. Each individual instrument calculated sometimes by guessing and sometimes by using real values that I was able to find, but also needing to deal with the fact that this is KSP and each part needs to have a mass, but not all the parts of Juno are going to be represented here because there were thousands on Juno and I've only got a couple hundred. So to help me figure some of that out, I went down here and did these little extra sections where I did some math, like on a hex panel, for example, figuring out the surface area and then taking a guess at the kilograms per cubic meter for honeycomb aluminum, and then ultimately taking a guess that that was about 58 to 59 kilograms. Doing the same thing for the external panels, the internal panels, the solar panels, small and large. All the solar panels added together, double checking the electronics vault mass right here, and then adding that all up by taking into account the titanium and the electronics inside and seeing that that should be about 200 kilograms. This is much more detailed than what I did to generate the launcher itself, but you can see I did that with the launcher too. I have all the different bits like the Centaur ISAs in here, engines and heat shields and common core boosters. Down on the Centaur we have the flight systems, avionics, antennas, batteries, everything was accounted for. In cases where I needed to keep my references, I have all the links over here on the side to show everywhere where I got the data. Sometimes it took some pretty serious digging, like this one time I was looking for how much hydrazine to put in the Centaur, and I found this one little section eventually that indicated there were a couple bladder tanks in the outside with a total of 340 pounds of fuel. And here you can see how I would be deploying things using hotkeys normally, but if I want to press on the Infernal Robotics buttons, I can do this. This is why I had two different sizes, or not sizes, but types of hinge. That hinge right there is set to go at a particular speed, and then these hinges here, here, and here are at a different speed from that one. That way I can just hit solar with one button and have them extend at the right speed to make them come out flat and straight. This also gives you a good look at that magnetometer on the end right there, and how that extended out from only one of the panels, and why I had to do one special from the others, but then the others are the same, so those two are the same, and then this one just had that one panel on the end missing, and the magnetometer in its place. Down in the bottom, we already rotated it out on the real one, but you can see here the waves instrument that can be rotated. I have the one joint right there, which can rotate that side, and this other joint here that rotates the other side, and a hotkey that does both of them at the exact same time. Then those extend out just a little bit to point out like this, which you saw in the video previously already. And here we are, happily spinning along as we're leaving the Earth, waving goodbye and zipping off into deeper space. Soon we'll be setting up our first deep space maneuver that will help us with our Earth gravity assist. But while we wait for that, let's take a look at one of those instruments.
Years ago, the magnetic field provided a reference for navigation on Earth. So for 400 or 500 years, whenever ships crossed the ocean, they carried compasses so they could find their way when you can't see stars or landmass. A magnetometer is like a fancy compass. It measures both the direction and the magnitude of the magnetic field. So in this case, we fly a magnetic sensor at the very outer extremity of the spacecraft. We're on what's called a magnetometer boom, which is about 12 feet in length. It's about twice as long as I am tall. The primary purpose for our investigation is to map the magnetic field of Jupiter very accurately and try to understand how it's generated deep down inside Jupiter, in Jupiter's electrically conducting core. What we're going to do is make very, very accurate measurements in orbit about Jupiter and basically envelop Jupiter in a dense net of observations, and that'll give us the ability to image what the magnetic field looks like down in Jupiter's core where it's generated.
Days and then weeks and then months are zipping by now as we zoom ahead in our orbit to where we're going to be making our deep space maneuver that will help us with that gravity assist. The Lyros engine wasn't designed to be run for a whole hour, but that's how long we need to fire, so what we're going to do is split this up into 2 burns of 30 minutes each. The first one is at the end of August, about a year after launching, and the second burn a couple weeks after that in September. Each burn being roughly about the same is changing the velocity by 300 to 400 meters per second using 300 to 400 kilograms of fuel. We've used our RCS system to rotate ourselves into the correct orientation. We've opened up the shield on the Lyros engine, and now we're firing it up, getting started on the first of those 30-minute long engine burns. Yes, I really did run this for 30 minutes. I just set a stopwatch and went off and got a sandwich and came back later, and the burn was almost done. I won't make you watch that entire time because that would be terribly boring. But on the other hand, you're not going to get to see what's past that right now either, because I'm going to end it here. It turned out that this was a very long episode, much longer than I thought it was going to be, so I'm going to break it up into 2 parts, so this whole thing is going to be a 3-part mini-series on Juno. So until we meet again in part 3, the finale of the Juno mission, I will see you later, Kerbinauts.
When I was younger, I was always fascinated by astronomy, and I can remember just looking up in space and looking out at the stars out there, wondering what was out there.
I actually wanted to be an aerospace engineer even when I was a little girl. I really liked math, and I liked, space and astronauts, and I would write letters to the NASA centers and get pictures and stuff.
I had posters in my bedroom of Jupiter and Neptune and Saturn. I thought they were just amazing.
As a little kid, Jupiter was my planet.
I would look out there and you couldn't touch it. You couldn't learn about it enough because you couldn't get there. And so I always had this yearning to want to reach out.
And when people would ask me, what do you want to do when you grow up? I said, I want to work on spaceships.
I really wanted to work on rockets and build things that would go into space.
And it's just really exciting to have a chance to do something that I really wanted to do when I was a little kid.
For whatever reason, I got lucky and I'm the head of Juno, and I'm reaching out. And of course, I could never have done it myself. It's only through everybody reaching together that we can reach it all.
It started out on the back of an envelope, as many things do.
It's amazing being able to see it, a vague notion that you have in your brain turn into a real piece of hardware that is going to fly all the way to Jupiter.
So Juno is really an incredible international mission. It's a very large mission, involves people from many, many different countries, scientists, engineers, administrative people, technicians, people who do purchasing. I mean, it's amazing how many people in different walks of life have to be involved in making a mission like this happen.
It's a big public endeavor. Everybody's involved.
We really have the A-team here, and it's amazing that when you get that kind of atmosphere and that kind of collaboration and synergy, how that can just make the whole thing, even the hardest problem, that much more palatable.
We check our egos at the door, we roll our sleeves up, and then we just dive in and work whatever needs to be worked.
I think that it's a tremendous experience to be involved in something where we can learn about how planets formed.
We ask why are we here, where do we come from?
Jupiter is the place to go to understand our origins, how the solar system formed, how the Earth got its water and organic molecules, and whether we are a typical planetary system in the cosmos.
You get to open a door that's never been opened by a human before.
You're sending something to some place where few things have ever gone.
When you work on a project like Juno, which is really exciting and there's a lot riding on it, a lot of people working on something that takes a long time to prepare, there's an opportunity to be really anxious. There's an opportunity to be really excited. You can worry about all kinds of things.
In a way, it's like having a child. You rear this child throughout the years, and then all of a sudden they take off on their own and they become independent.
It feels a little like an unruly teenager that I'm ready to get out of the house.
Some of those cameras really do feel like my babies that I've been working on for such a long time. It's going to be really wonderful.
We developed the design for the spacecraft, we put it together, and we let it fly.
There's nothing like listening to that launch vehicle take off and watching something that you built and poured a lot of time and energy into leave the planet.
You know that the whole team's done everything they can to ensure mission success, but there are no guarantees. So I think pretty much everybody holds their breath and just waits.
I think it's starting to hit all of us how close we are, and this is really going to happen.
I'm excited to see this thing go and shake people's hands and walk away proud of working this mission.
I don't know what else in life that you could do that will be so exciting and so different all the time, and again have such job satisfaction.
It's very rare to see a team that knows how to work together the way that this team does.
It's quite a privilege and honor to be able to perform in this role.
This is certainly the best job I've ever had, and I love it.
It's such a fun job, and it's really a wonderful way to make the world seem even bigger than it is.